21st Century Saints, a podcast and live stream series for those affiliated with or adjacent to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints in the UK and around the world. I'm your host, Alana Wilson-Bryce, and this is my co-host, Jane Christie.
Hey.
Today's date is the 26th of May, 2021. In this episode, we would like to introduce you to Richard Barrington, who is currently serving as a 70 in the Community of Christ.
Good evening.
Nice to meet you, Richard, properly on here. We've all met a few times before. I would say we're all good friends, so I'm excited to tell everybody who you are. Will we just jump straight in and just ask you just to share a little bit about you and your bio and all those good things?
Sure.
Who you are, where you're from?
Yeah, no problem. So I'm Richard Barrington. I'm a third generation member of Community of Christ, formerly known as the Reorganization, and we'll touch on that in a bit. My grandfather was a convert to the church. He was like the vast majority of people who did convert to the church in the early days, was working class. So he was a cutter. So he cut out patterns in a Macintosh factory. That was his starting job, and was a great believer in education. My dad was one of the first in his area to go to university, as did my aunt. And my dad worked for Boots, the chemist, and then we moved about a great deal. So I was baptized at 8. Wish I could be rebaptized now. It might mean something. Of course, as a kid of 8, I'm not convinced it could, but did it. Everybody else was doing it, and spent about a third of my life growing up in a congregation. And these were the days when church was 3 times on Sunday. So it was morning worship, afternoon Sunday school, evening preaching service. There'd be a midweek prayer service, youth groups, priesthood meetings, women's meetings. So there was something on every night of the week in those days. And so I grew up immersed in that culture. My father was what we call a trustee, I guess, of Dunfield House. So Dunfield House is a big retreat centre that we own in the British Isles. It's a group accommodation place on the Welsh borders. It's an amazing spiritual home for many of us. And I spent many happy times there growing up. When we moved away from congregations, my dad was quite a preacher. So we'd be forever being asked to go and visit congregations all over the country. So most of my weekends was spent in the back of the Morris Minor with my 3 siblings, mum and dad in the front, and we'd drive for hours to South Wales and to the north and to the Midlands, and saints would put us up in their homes, and then we'd have weekend activities, and my dad would preach on Sunday. And because of the proximity of our congregations, he might preach 3 times on a Sunday, and then we'd get in the car and go home. So my life was completely immersed in Community of Christ up until I was really a teenager. Didn't know what I wanted to be when I grew up, so I got the chance to work for the church it was about 18 months. I guess a bit like a mission, but we don't do those formally, so we made it up as we went along. And I worked with a guy called Andrew Bolton, who some seeing this might know. He became an apostle in Community of Christ and retired a few years ago, and now lives in Leicester. And he's an amazing advocate for peace, and touch on that as we go forward. I then really didn't know what I wanted to be. I left school at 16, didn't know what I wanted to do. So I was a policeman for a couple of years. I was a postman. And one day as a postman, I walked into a company, and the guy, I delivered mail to him for about a week, and he said, "Would you like a job?" So I thought, yeah, all right. And that's where I got into computing. He wanted somebody to work on his computer. He and I went on a training course, and for me, that became the next 40 years of my life. So
can I jump in and ask a question? Are
sure.
you had talked about till you got till your teenage? Are you a rebellious teen? Like, what kind of teen are you?
Oh no, I'm far too good to be rebellious. No, I was pretty rebellious. I remember one time heading for church, and we were going from Wolverhampton, where we lived at the time, to Birmingham congregation, and I sort of said to my dad, I don't want to go. So he stopped the car and said, go home. So I had a 3-mile walk home. And seriously, and that's,
was it passive aggressive? You can go home, or was it, I'm not going to make you go to church? Like, what kind of home was that?
No, my dad was never judgmental. If you went to him with a problem, he wouldn't give you an answer. He would help you work through both sides of the thing. He had anger management issues, which I think is a Barrington thing. I do as well. He used to say things like "my sainted aunt." I tend to use slightly more colourful language than that.
I don't believe you've got an angry side, not at all.
And so, yeah, no, I was rebellious. I used to go clubbing. Being just outside Birmingham, used to go into there was a lovely nightclub called the Opposite Lock down on Gas Street, right by the canal side. Used to go dancing in there. It was kind of a very, by the time I got to that point, things were kind of very mixed and fluid. What I learned very quickly was that I was an absolute innocent.
Yeah.
I've been brought up incredibly well. Had no sense of that because this was my normal. And then to start to experience the world was very challenging. In fact, one night I was supposed to be going to Birmingham, and it was to go round some of the pubs with some friends, and that was the night of the pub bombings. And again, no concept of, the world as it was, because I had this amazing support group and was surrounded by love from family and from church. And yeah, there's a trade-off there sometimes, but that's the thing that has brought me back time and time again.
I just want to let our audio, our live viewers just let you know that when Alana turns her camera off, Alana has a few. We have real life podcasting here, so Alana also has her kid, and when she has to pop out for a little second, might turn her camera off. So just making sure that you all know that she's okay. And I may have to do the same because we have real lives here. But because, Richard, I really I think that's such a huge moment in British history, and because we're going to be talking about peace a little bit, I have to ask, because I think our audience would be really interested. What was your experience of the pub bombings? Because that was huge.
I have been, I'm going to use the term blessed, that there have been times and situations in my life where things could have happened and they didn't. That night, I can't even remember now why, but that night I decided that I would stay home. It was all planned. We were meeting at the station at Wolverhampton Station to go into Birmingham, and I just decided for some reason that night not to. And I'm a believer in serendipity. Like I say, walking into an organization, the guy says, "Would you like a job?" I've never had a life plan. Things have happened, and I think partly to do with how I was brought up, things that have happened as well that I have just accepted. So I woke up one morning blind in my right eye. I had a blood clot. Quite a few people made a little bit of a fuss about it. My attitude was, it could have been my brain. It's a blood clot in my head. It could have been my brain. I could be dead. I've just lost the sight in my right eye. There are people far worse off than me. I'm just going to get on with life. That's kind of how I've been raised in one sense. You just deal with what's in front of you. And it also stems a little bit, I think, from the police training, which came after the pub bombing thing. But, you know, you deal with what's in front of you. You don't have time or space to deal with anything else. You focus on what's in front of you because, you know, somebody is in need, somebody is hurt, somebody's threatening you, whatever it may be. So you deal with that, and you don't worry about the consequences so much because you've got to deal with it now.
So, although like we're going to continue with some more of your bio, if I could just sort of jump in for a little second, because our backgrounds, Alana and I, we're from a active Latter-day Saint background, and so, you know, I guess many people in the British Isles that we know haven't really heard a lot about Community of Christ and would have questions you know, about that. So, you know, for example, like I refer to Alana as my showbiz wife. I'm Alana's showbiz wife. But I this is the first time I've ever, you know, joked about that on air because, you know, Latter-day Saints, we don't use that. Is that too near the knuckle? That's a polygamy joke, right? Can we get a little bit cagey about that. So question one would be, are you guys the polygamists?
So I spent my entire existence up to and including the age of 30, when I first sort of really went away from the church for a while, telling people what I wasn't,
right,
not what I was.
Yeah.
So if you just taking 2 minutes history, and then we'll come up to today and why that's important. Of course, when Joseph was murdered, Joseph and Hiram were murdered in 1845 or whatever it was, the church split up, it fragmented. A large body of people followed Brigham to Salt Lake City. There were other groups that went off, all of which, or the majority of whom, adopted polygamy. There was a group that stayed around Nauvoo and that sort of area who didn't. And they sort of coalesced around Emma and Joseph's son, Joseph Smith III. And maybe because of what they experienced through those times, first of all, we always were taught that Joseph didn't practice polygamy. We were told that, yes, he might have been sealed to multiple women, and sealing was going on at that time. And for us, it was always Brigham that kind of industrialized polygamy. So, you know, 50 odd children or whatever it was, and so on, and multiple wives. Emma only ever said she was his, you know, she only ever said he was his one wife. His son always denied it up until late in his life, where he said he may have done some of these things, but it was wrong to do those things. And so as the reorganization, we kind of drifted through that, but also because we never actually put Joseph on a pedestal and deified him, and because our prophets are all men so far with feet of clay, we never actually, you know, kind of really dealt with that until the last, I guess, 10, 15, 20 years, where, you know, there's a greater recognition of his behaviors in that Nauvoo period. And but because it was 200 years ago, and because he isn't central to our story, it hasn't affected us that much. But I say the biggest problem for me, as you know, growing up, was I would say I'm a member of the Reorganized Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, not the Mormons. And people assumed that was our name. Our name actually went on and on and on and on and on and on because, and so we spent so much time telling people who we weren't. There was very little time really to focus in on who we were. Yeah. And certainly in the 1970s, when about the time I was doing that bit of work with the church, whenever we met people from the LDS tradition, it tended to be a bit of a contest as to who was right. And people wanted to prove that, and at that time there were still people who were saying we were the only church, we were the only true church, so there were some hangovers from that period. But as we went through, particularly through the civil rights movement in the 60s, and started to think of things differently, and into the 70s, we began to realize that we needed to be inclusive, not exclusive. And when you become exclusive and you have the tests of faith, if you don't do the following things, you cannot get your temple recommend, you cannot yada yada yada. You create a space in which you're excluding more people than you're opening your arms to, and that. Sorry, go on.
Well, I guess what I'm wondering for an audience of people who are active UK church members, I guess, and maybe it's looking for a threat level. There's some kind of level of contest there, like, because, obviously you're not the real Mormons, we're the real Mormons, this kind of thing, right?
Yeah, no, of course we're not.
I think most active members of, did you notice I just tried to get you to agree to that statement?
Yeah,
which,
that's fine.
Was it going to happen? So, we, so there's that sort of suspicion of, well, okay, you're not the real church then. Mm-hmm. And I don't think most members of the church in the British Isles know just how many different flavors of Mormonism there is. There's a big umbrella there. But what we also have are these sort of big names of fundamentalism and what would we call it? The real extremist sort of type thing. Yeah. And so I guess it's meeting you guys, finding out that, oh, hold on a minute, we have this shared identity. This is really cool, and you're really, really nice. Y'all are, really. So we're supposed to be, Latter-day Saints are supposed to be the great neighbours, the people who are really, really nice. My experience so far in meeting you and other members of Community of Christ is that you guys are the really cool ones. You're really, really cool. So if we have
I'm in my 60s. I'm not sure I can be cool anymore. I think it's that. So I think I've been trying to work out how do I process and how do I respond to some of the potential questions that may come up. And I think for me, one of the founding principles of the church back in the 1830s was common consent. And in fact, in the initial stages of the church, everything was held in common. It was a true socialist idyll that was being built. You joined the church, you gave everything you had to the bishops, and the bishops gave you back what you needed to live, and they shared it equally amongst everybody who was there. And things changed very much between those early days through Kirtland into Nauvoo. But there are some things that we have kept all along, and common consent is one of them. So, we have business meetings every year at a congregational level, at what you would call a stake level, and a world conference where the membership actually get to debate and discuss. We see all of the finances, and we get to say, do we agree with this money being spent in this way? And as a member, I have the right to challenge. And if I think that we should as my congregation should support another group, help somebody else. And we've got groups that run food banks. We've got one group that provides a clothing bank, and so on and so forth. Then we can do. Okay. And that's because of common consent. So it means that when the prophet says, I think, that the Lord has said to me that the following, and I believe that this is revelation, We don't accept it as gospel. It goes to the membership. So we get to discern, is this God speaking to us now? It goes through the quorums of the priesthood until eventually it will go to World Conference, where 3,000 or 4,000 delegates from around the world, from every country that we're represented in, will again go through a discernment process. And at that point, it becomes, and it joins our open canon of scripture. Because if you've got an open canon of scripture, you need to kind of add to it occasionally. So we're up at 165 within the Doctrine and Covenants. And that openness and transparency also helps in a whole range of other things. So, for example, as a member of the priesthood, I have a background check and I have to do safeguarding training. If I'm going to work with children, I have to do safeguarding training and have a background check, because we want to create a safe space where people can experience the divine, whatever and how we describe it. And your question as to are we true Mormons or not? I would say that we are true restorationists.
Oh, I love that.
But we are Christians first. We follow the teachings of Jesus, and there is only one commandment that matters, and that is to love the Lord your God and to love your neighbor. And that's it. Love is love. And so everything else kind of comes out of that openness, that willingness to listen, and particularly now, I think the biggest change, and up until, somebody will correct me, no doubt, I always get my dates wrong, but I guess up until the mid-70s, we always had a direct descendant of Joseph Smith as our prophet. And our first non-descendant, Grant, and then our current prophet, Steve. I'm afraid we call him Steve. If you called him Mr. VZ, he'd probably slap you, but a holy slap, just a nice slap, not a hard slap, because we're not, and because of this openness, we don't have that hierarchy. So the prophet doesn't dictate through general authorities or whatever that layer of structure may be. And if you as a member wanted to try something new, and Jane, you've heard our mission prayer a number of times, to risk something new, to be a blessing of your love and peace. Well, I can't do that if I'm constrained by rules and regulations that say what I can and can't do, how I should dress. I notice you haven't got your shoulders uncovered tonight. It's
the night is early.
So that's probably a long way of going through that, but that's kind of why I and that's also why I keep coming back, because I have left and experienced other communities. For years, my son Alex was a head chorister at a school in the Church of England environment. My wife and I sang there most Sundays in the choir. My wife used to run a youth choir in the local Church of England church. Used to go there, not as much as I should have done, but used to go a lot. I keep coming back because I have space to be me, and it is, and I think for me, one of the challenges for many people who transition out of the LDS community is that is where their friendships and their family and all those things are, and sometimes there is a very negative response to that person leaving, which means they're not just leaving a faith, they're leaving that support network. And even though I've been away, every time I have come back, it's kind of felt that I've never left from those people's perspectives, even though sometimes it's quite odd, because at one point I left before some of the big transitions that we've gone through in the last, I know you want to get onto, in the last 15 years, 20 years, actually 30 years now. So it's one of the things I've tried to do as a 70 is encourage one or two of the people who have left Community of Christ in the past for reasons that were perfectly legitimate and genuine and true at that point to them, to realize that actually we've moved on so far from those days.
Now that's what I wanted to take you back and ask you a little bit about. That you're living through the church at some huge times in the church's history. Can you take me back a little bit to the 70s and tell me what was going on there, or what your perception was, and talk to me a little bit about that.
Yeah, so the church was going through a transformation. And it started a bit before that. It started really in the 60s, civil rights, beginning to question many of the things. I mean, we had, we had black people in the priesthood, as did the original church. Joseph Smith ordained a number of black people back then. We continued in that tradition, but we were still excluding women from the priesthood. If you were gay, well, obviously just a gay man, you could only be priesthood if you were celibate. Obviously, we took that on trust, but we kind of again were playing around with not really understanding where we were being led. And I think Steve Veazey says it best when he talks now about actually what we've been doing is shedding being a religion, and we are becoming a movement. Because religion tends to be about control. It tends to be about conformity. A movement tends to be about a direction of travel. And our direction of travel is to build the peaceable kingdom here on earth. And we can't do that by sitting on our pews on a Sunday feeling good about ourselves or bad about ourselves. We can only do it when we reach out in faith. So for me, the transition, and I think the transition also happened when I think it was Wally B. Smith. They were very concerned that, I guess very much like the LDS Church, we didn't really do formal training in things like theology. We did have things called temple school courses where we tried to, lift up people's understanding and learning. And at that time, many of the church leaders actually went to seminary, to a Baptist seminary, because we didn't have our own at the time. And I think that broadened and widened their understanding and horizons. And it also means that, and also as you give up some of these things, so giving up believing we're the only true church, it makes you more inclusive, which means that other faith communities can have a better dialogue with you. So we're very close to the Quakers, for instance. We have a good relationship with the Quakers. If I wasn't Community of Christ, I would be a Quaker, apart from the fact they don't sing. And if I could convince them to sing, it's a toss-up between the two. Do you know what I mean? It's that kind of... and
I love a bit of holy envy thrown into the
mix. Yeah, you can have some. If I could only get them to sing. But we've learned so much by being open to those influences. And I remember one or two people. We have every summer we have a thing which we now call summer camp, which used to be reunion, where we would get together at Dunfield and we'd have 150, 200 members coming together, all families doing all sorts of things. I remember one or two people looking a bit askance when we started doing things like yoga and meditation and stuff like that. But actually, anything that can bring you closer to the divine, whatever influence that is coming from, has to be a good thing, doesn't it?
That's what we're taught. That's...
And so as we went through from the 60s through the 70s, we knew things had to change, but there's always a question about timing. And there's always a question about how you manage that change. And if I skip forward slightly, so women in the priesthood is a classic example. It was really, I'm going to say, sprung on the church. The prophet came to World Conference with a revelation, or well, within what we call an inspired document originally, before it becomes a revelation, before it becomes accepted as scripture in the Doctrine and Covenants, which called for women in the priesthood. And this caused a massive schism in our community. We lost tens of thousands of members as a result of this decision, and it was voted on, and it was a majority who were in favor of it, and the timing was right. Could we have handled it better? And the answer is yes, clearly. And many of those who did go off to other, and there were a whole bunch, again, another bunch of splinter groups that sprang up across, particularly in the US, more than anywhere else, I would say. Many of those have drifted back over time. And it's, I know of congregations in the British Isles, for instance, that would have closed if it wasn't for the female priesthood who were there. But it also is an important lesson. It was very much for me. So my father wasn't opposed to women in the priesthood. He believed that they should have their own order. So he felt, Aaronic Melchizedek was very much male-centric. How do we find a model that allowed for women's giftedness to be? But the moment that the church voted, he accepted, because the principle of common consent was more important to him than his concerns about the nature of that particular thing. And that for me was always a challenge, that there were people who had accepted common consent maybe only because it agreed with them. Yeah. And here was the first big test where they didn't agree with it and they didn't remain. And that, again, is one of those things.
So there are a couple of things that you said stimulating, really exciting ideas. I guess the first thing, and I know we'll come back to the idea of common consent, but the idea that it's not a foregone conclusion, that something's not being presented and you're voting to, it's not just going to automatically go through, it's a formality. So I find that really interesting. I also am really excited by the thought of the discussions that were happening around that your dad is having, these kind of, can you imagine, Alana, those kind of conversations happening? Just to be able to talk about that is something that is really exciting. But I also love that you had talked about, you said, could we have done better?
Yeah.
Yes, we could. Wow. You could have done better as a church.
Yeah, we can all, well, and in fact, one of our latest, which we've accepted as revelations, it talks about the fact that there has been a tendency to use the Bible to abuse people, to hit them over the head with it, and we are called on as a church to repent from using the Bible as a weapon to to put people down, to say that you're not worthy, to deny some people in on the fringes of our community communion, as in togetherness, to being with it. And if we scroll forward to the 90s now, so we've been struggling with how we treat our LGBT family, and we are a global church. There are places where we have congregations where if we came out as supporting homosexuals, they would be burnt and torn down because of what the prevalent environment in which they're operating. So we decided, and we started a few years before that through the Temple School courses I was mentioning. We talked about, one of them was about human sexuality. And we kind of went through that and looked at the sections of the Bible in particular, because again, there's nothing particularly in the Book of Mormon or the Doctrine and Covenants, and there's certainly nothing in the teachings of Jesus about LGBT rights, or or so on. So we went through all of the bits that there are, and Paul's teachings, and Sodom and Gomorrah, and all those kinds of things, and the bit in Leviticus, and we deconstructed them. And we went right back, and we have some great theologians. They went right back to the Greek and the Aramaic, and they looked at what these things were actually saying, and then we looked at them in context. And for instance, Paul's letter to the Romans is talking about what was happening in Rome. If you're a Roman patriarch, you kept sex slaves, usually children, and if they didn't do what you wanted them to do, they would be branded and then they would be killed. And so Paul's saying this is wrong. He's right. Because what was happening in Rome at that time was not about the love between two people. And if we go right back to Sodom and Gomorrah, it's got nothing to do with love between two people. It's about a gang threatening gang rape on some strangers who turn up at somebody's house. So we went through this process of starting to try and look at why had we interpreted these sections in this way, and why were we not putting them in context and considering how we were talking and treating people as a result of that. And it's this, you can love the sinner but not the sin. Nonsense. I nearly used I nearly used a B word there.
I just said yes.
Function in the podcast. So, but yeah, we do. Yeah, nonsense.
I will refrain. I will try very hard not to. So we started this process of discernment, of really trying to understand what was God calling us to? Where should we be going with this? And it was decided that...
First of all, talk to me when you're saying it's decided. So how is it decided? What's that process of discernment?
Traditionally, something like this would come down, as an inspired document. We would take it through all these processes. We would go through some kind of, and then decide, yes, this is revelation from God. It needs to go into the Doctrine and Covenants and so on. It was decided that we would really start. We would start that dialogue process locally. So congregations, regions, countries had their own process where they would look at what it was that we were seeking to achieve, and were able to accept or reject at a very local level. And it's something I think the church will do more of. We have more members outside of more members who are non-white Anglo-Saxon Protestants than we do who are. The church is bigger in India and other parts of the world than it is in America, and so again we have to sometimes take off that particular hat and try and look at things from a global perspective, because God is God of everyone, not just Independence, Missouri. So this process enabled different communities to have that conversation. And where we did, and say process of discernment, and it was beautifully done. Richard James, who's our local field apostle, he's Welsh. We don't hold that against him too often. Richard and I haven't always seen eye to eye, but he did a beautiful spiritual job of guiding us through this process, where there was a safe space for anybody to express their opinion. and and their view, or how they believe that one person in the British Isles taught that they believed that they had a revelation themselves, all those kinds of things, and we listened. And we gave space where everybody could share their views, and we set up a process where people could speak because they were in favour or against, or were unsure and wanted clarification. And again, nobody was challenged as a result of that. Nobody was you're wrong, don't agree. They were given the space to do that, and we took a couple of days at this, and we continually came back to prayer and meditation, and just getting out into the countryside just to have because it wasn't about kettling people until they came to a decision. It was about creating a safe space where people could. And I remember talking to one person who was very concerned, and it was actually a lady member of the priesthood. And I just said to her, you do realize that if you hadn't have been called, your congregation would have closed. Now just think of the giftedness that we have been excluding because of our approach to this, and just dream about what this could mean going forward. And in the end, all of the national conferences that have occurred have overwhelmingly, in the 90+% voted in favour, and it hasn't caused the massive drop off. And I'm not saying we did it just to keep people, because that wasn't what it was about. It was about having learnt from that previous dramatic change, and from my learning from you guys and from other LDS members that I've met, to unpick, you've got so much more to unpick for women to come into the priesthood, right the way through to the celestial kingdom, and the role of woman right the way into heaven itself. You've got to find out, how do you deconstruct all of those things. So, there may even be, and I don't know, there may even be people in Utah, there may be apostles who are trying to get their head around, how do we do this? But again, if you haven't got people who have a very strong theology and a Christology and an understanding of how do you then deconstruct what we have taught, and what we have, sometimes excommunicated people for having and holding as views and opinions, it's going to be incredibly hard to turn that particular corner. Now, say, could they even do something like my dad was suggesting? A different set of, and you could even argue in the, what's it called, the Women's Relief Society. Maybe there's something in that. I don't know, but again, does that just reinforce the set? And that's kind of my conversation with my dad at the time. Does that just make it second class? How do we ensure that full equality? And in fact, we even changed them, because we used to have these, and they were always incredible characters who were patriarchs in the church. But of course, they were called patriarchs and evangelists. And of course, you can't have a female patriarch, because patri is, so we just call them all evangelists now. And over that 30 coming up for 35 years now, I guess, period, we now have women who are apostles. We have, I think our apostles speak 6 or 7 different languages. It really is like Pentecost. Every time they get together, we have to have translators, because God calls who God calls, and that giftedness is all over the world. And and may they be black or female or white or gay, or God calls who God calls, and we shouldn't put any kind of constraints in how that calling happens.
Absolutely. So I have a visual to share just shortly of what that looks like. But so in this church where all of these exciting conversations are happening, Alana and I had attended a Sunstone Symposium event, which is I don't know. I think the people who organise it sort of refer to it as like Mormon Comic Con. It's where all of these different flavors of people who are affiliated somewhere in this spectrum of Mormonism can all get together. And it's incredibly welcome and positive. And also people who have perhaps left whatever faith expression that they're in. It's a wonderful experience. And as we got there for the first time, Alana, you remember this? The first person who came, we were there so early. And as we were waiting outside, the first person who came to speak to us, can you remember what you later found out? Who they were?
Yeah, I found out it was an apostle of the Community of Christ.
Yeah.
And it just totally floored me. Because I'm like, this is an apostle. He's in plain clothes. He's just chatting away like he's just a person like myself. And I was like, no, there's no way he's an apostle.
Where's this guy's tie?
Where's his suit and tie? Where's the prominent, walking in like, I'm an apostle? It was just so strange. It was so strange.
Exactly. And it was so Lachlan Mackay had come straight over just to introduce himself and say hi. And that was really cool. And then the second, I remember the second major thing from this. So previously you guys were on my radar because in the sort of Mormon LDS online space, lots and lots of people have been saying that they had gone to a Community of Christ service or some kind of spiritual experience with the Community of Christ, and how wonderful it was. Who were still active LDS, but just had these incredible experiences, and what a great people they were. So I was kind of interested, and so I was aware of some of the reasons why people really resonated with the people and with the faith in general. But I remember sort of taking Alana by the hand and another friend who was with us, and we'd come over to see you. And I was like, okay, you have to, can you explain these, talk to us about gay people in the church. And you were just, it was like so clumsily worded. And you were just like, well, you don't have to be gay. And it was just so good that we could laugh.
It's not compulsory.
It's not compulsory. And I thought that was brilliant.
He's actually a direct descendant of Joseph, which I didn't know until recently. And he's actually he looks after historic sites and has a lot to do with looking at the history, which is why he was kind of over doing some of the stuff. It's this thing. If we follow the teachings of Jesus, then we have to recognize that we are all sinners. Our prophets have feet of clay. Who are you to call me good? Jesus said, I'm not good. Only our Father in heaven is good. And so if we are not a community of fallen, sinners, if we don't recognize that my sin is something I've got to deal with, and there are things in my life, my past, that I regret, there are also things in my life that I cannot change, but I have learned from, and if you are not humble enough to recognize that you can be wrong, collectively, the majority isn't always right. It just isn't the case. There are numerous examples, and it takes one person to challenge, to drive change, and we can look through history, we can look through if you like, non-church history, and see individuals who have affected major change. The question is, how do you affect real change in an organization if the organization isn't prepared to change? And I know that's something that many in the LDS community are wrestling with, is they want to be faithful. They have got so much from their time with the LDS Church, and they think that the LDS Church should be more inclusive than exclusive. How do you get there is a battle. I say we were very fortunate because of common consent, because and I think also, we're slightly, the British Isles has always been kind of gobby, for want of a better expression. We've always had a number of a number of our theologians, a number of have gone to the States and become apostles. Andrew Bolton, who you met, Richard James. We've contributed apostles. And others who have been heavily involved in shaping some of the thinking of the church. That and we have always had one classic example is this is a story from my grandfather's days of the time when he stopped and wouldn't allow communion to be served because he knew that two of the members who were going to take communion had a disagreement, and they needed to go outside and sort it before he would serve communion to anybody. So apparently they kept singing the hymn over and over until they came back in, arm in arm. And that's and that has been an important lesson to me through my time with Community of Christ. And I say I keep coming back because probably they're the only people who'd have me. It is where I have found an abiding love from those people. It's also one of the few places where I have really, really experienced the divine. So I have had spiritual experiences that I cannot explain. I can talk about, but I can't explain how or why they happened. And there have been times where I have been given, we talk about us all being a prophetic people. And there have been times where I have been led to prophesy, whatever the word is, to say things that didn't come from me. One, and I won't go into details, but one was to a member who ended up with Alzheimer's, and I was able, before they had their Alzheimer's, I was able to share something with them that came from somewhere else. I was used as an instrument in that way. Did I say that exactly the words that I've been, that were in my, I don't know. And again, I obviously passed that experience through me. So, I wasn't a robot at that time. I was, but that's what we believe we are all called to be. And so I have felt the love of my Heavenly Father in Community of Christ, more than anywhere else. And it's also a faith community or a movement that recognizes, and I've done a lot in the environmental space. I got heavily involved in climate change policy way back.
As we're going to talk about a little bit about climate change and peace, so I want to share this image that you had sent me, because I really wanted to show our audience, what does this look like? What does the leadership visually look like? And we go out as a podcast too. So what I'm going to ask you to do is I share this image, if you wouldn't mind just describing what we're going to see, that would be awesome. But if I could I'll just share this with you all right now.
I hope it's
we
not
should
one of
share
me
the
in the pink
screen.
cycling shorts.
And this is the image. Tell us what we're looking at. Can you see it?
I can't see it. Is it the one with the apostles playing softball?
It is. It is.
Okay, so what you are seeing, or what I'm going to narrate to you, is our apostles during one of the, I think it was at World Conference, ended up playing softball together. They're all casually dressed. There are black and Asian and white. There are young and old. I think the youngest is late 30s, oldest is probably late 50s, early 60s. There are 5 women there. Say there's someone there from French Polynesia, 2 people from Africa, someone from South America, Canadian, American, English, or Welsh. Sorry, Richard, Welsh. It is a representation of who Community of Christ is, and you know, and they none of I don't think any of them own a white suit. I'm pretty sure several of them don't own ties. But it is really who we are. You know, we're called to have joy and to have fun and to sing and laugh and you know and be a spiritual people. And so that kind of explains who we are in one shot.
I think though that's a group of people that you could walk over and ask to join their game. you would want to hang out with those people. You could do that quite comfortably. So talk to us about the church right now. What's going on with the church of it?
Okay.
The church, normally when I say the church, we're talking about Latter-day Saints.
Yep.
Community of Christ. What's going on with the church right now?
What's going on? What's occurring? So we are continuing to move towards the peaceable kingdom. We are challenged on a daily basis to consider how, what, where, when, and why. What are we going to do today for peace? What are we going to do today to further the cause of Zion? Let's call it Zion because that's a common term I think that we all have. And nothing like singing. No, you're quite right, Lara. We love to sing, and it is so wherever the saints gather, you will hear us singing, and it could be 60s folk music right the way through to very serious, you know. Thank thee, O God, for a prophet. Although we've changed the words slightly because you know we do that kind of thing. So I guess where we are now is we've moved away from, say, any kind of test of faith. Thou shalt not, and we have a set of principles, and the principles include things like the worth of all people. And that goes right back to the earliest sections in the Doctrine and Covenants. The worth of all souls are great in the sight of God. You know, we're all equal in God's sight. You know, so we have to embrace the worth of all people, and that doesn't matter whether you are LGBT. You know, sometimes it's alphabet spaghetti, and if I miss a letter, forgive me. But it doesn't matter whether you're LGBTGIQ plus.
See, that's something I find a little problematic, just because, you know, it is scriptural and you've said it, but I don't feel we practice that in the way we aren't inclusive of everyone. You know, They say the worth of souls is great in the sight of God. So if the worth of souls is great in the sight of God, why are we as a church not implementing that? Now, I truly believe they are, but in my opinion, they're not, because if they were, everyone would be welcomed no matter what. You know, without all this, you can't participate because you're a practicing gay man or you're a practicing gay woman. You know, so I just struggle with that a little bit now.
But also, I think, you know, on the back of it, we also have the thing about what we call faithful disagreement. And that creates a space that allows people to have different opinions. As a 17 Community of Christ, I cannot stand up in a pulpit and preach something that goes completely against the tenets of the church. But I can hold those opinions, and I can express those opinions freely in dialogue and conversation with people. And the biggest problem that LDS seekers find is and there were a couple that came and asked a direct question of the UK seekers page or one of the US ones, and got 150 different answers. Because they didn't say, what does the church believe?
Yep.
They asked, what do you believe? And so the church has, as I say, these set of principles about the sacredness of creation. And Jane, I know you were fascinated that one of my fellow 70 is a member of Christian Extinction Rebellion, and went to the London demonstrations and was there to provide safety and support and comfort to people who were there. And because we can. Now, not everybody in the church agrees with that approach. And but that's okay, and
I really, actually, if it's okay, I would really like to just share this, and I hope you won't mind me doing it. But Michael from Clay Cross is a great guy that I've been able to sort of meet him at an online worship. But we've been sent out the church magazine. Thank you for sending that to me, Andrew. May I share this, because I think this was wonderful that this appeared in the church magazine. My Experience of Nonviolent Protest by Michael Clark. In September 2020, I got to go to London with Andrew Fellows. Thank you for making that possible, Andrew. You see, I care about climate change, and so does Andrew. We are both members of Extinction Rebellion, but more importantly, Christian Climate Action, which I prefer to Extinction Rebellion. I feel more at home with Christian Climate Action. Because of my depression, I'm not keen on leaving my home, but I felt that it was right for me to go. With prayer and Andrew and friends from Chesterfield XR, I would be okay. And he goes on to sort of share some very brief experiences. It was wonderful, that exciting and stimulating and vulnerable and honest. That's a good place to be. So thank you, Michael, for talking about that and sharing it in the magazine. This is why I call you guys our cool cousins. That's the kind of thing that you guys are doing. So speak to us about peace and speak to us about climate change.
Okay, so really, and say there should be nothing new when we look from the original 1830s church to today. Zion, the peaceable kingdom, was always front and center of what the church was established to try and achieve. Lost its way, the Mormon Legion, all sorts of things. But if you went back into the 1830s church, it was a peace church. And only when it got to a point where I think the abuse that it was getting and the fact that they kept getting driven out of places, and then they started looking to defend themselves and so on. But in the last, again, probably as a result of civil rights and everything else, we really started to refocus on this thing, peace. Although it's fascinating that our church seal, so the logo of Community of Christ, or RLDS as it was, is the lion, the lamb, and the boy shall lead them, and the word peace is underneath it. So since the 1860s, when we formed, our banner, as it were, has always had the word peace on it. But it's only recently that we've really started to understand that you cannot have social justice, you cannot have economic justice if you do not have environmental justice, and if you do not have peace. Because without peace, peace is not just an absence of war. Peace is something far greater than that. It is a coming together. It is God's shalom as far as we are concerned. It's all of those things coming together. It's about equity and equality. And again, if you don't treat everybody the same, how can you claim social justice? If you are not supporting the poor and the needy, not because of charity. Charity is a word that does not exist in the Bible. The word in the Bible is social justice. Justice, 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 and peace, peace, peace are the terms that are in the Bible. Okay, so if we are to be followers of Jesus, then the peacemaker, then that's what we have to be focused on, and we really started to develop this thinking about peace for me, peace for my family, peace for my community, peace for the world, and how do we reflect those things, and how do we take that, and that's where this movement idea, principle, concept comes from, that we are moving towards the peaceable kingdom. We are taking the learnings of Jesus and understanding everything he did was about alleviating suffering. It was about justice. The woman who was about to be stoned, that was a matter of justice, and righteousness. And so every example he gives in all of his stories, feeding people on the Sabbath, they were all there and all to do with that, with creating the peaceable kingdom, the Prince of Peace. And so I became, when I was sort of, when I used to wear green dungarees, and that's before B&Q made them fashionable, way back in the 70s. I was Greenpeace and those kinds of things, and then I kind of forgot all about that. And then 2000, I got to go on a course to Cambridge from work, and really began to understand what climate change was and the impacts of it. And there was an awakening. It wasn't just me. This was happening across the church. And because we are allowed to experiment, to risk, and to fail, and I can share an experience where something I started failed. You are in, I worked for this amazing company called Sun Microsystems for many years. And one of our mantras was, to ask permission is to seek denial. And when you joined Sun, you went through days of psychometric testing, all those kinds of things, and the principle was that once you were a member of Sun Microsystems staff, you just got on and did what you believed to be the right thing for the company. And Community of Christ has always had that kind of persona. So you've met Sue and Paul, who just retired from Dunfield, and a number of the other people who were involved. We tried something called Developing Human Wholeness. It was very worthy back in the 70s, and the idea was to look at how do we go beyond just spiritual and look at the physical and the intellectual, and can we bring all those, so we ran some weekends and we put some workshops together, and we were allowed, there was nobody in church saying, oh, you can't do that, oh, that's not how we do things here. There was always the opportunity to try something new, and we've kind of codified that in many ways in the mission prayer, which is about becoming a blessing, of love and peace, and that's what we're kind of now focused on. I have no idea what the afterlife is. I sincerely hope and pray that I will be with my family who've gone before. I don't know. It may just be oblivion. I hope not, but I cannot and must not be so focused on that I forget what's in front of me now.
The journey right now.
Yeah.
I love that. Yep, me too.
I'm going to get Alana, if you could maybe share, if you remember a little while back, we got to hang out with Richard, and we also got to hang out with Robin Linkhart, one of the apostles in Community of Christ. We had a really amazing experience. Do you want to talk? Like, I mean, maybe I suppose it might be talking about my experience, because I was like talking to you about this for days. So
yeah, you're
like,
putting me on the spot here, Jane, to ask me to recall my memory.
Yeah, when we got to experience worship with Joey and Robin, as we got to have, so we would say sacrament, but when we got to communion, what that was like for you.
Yeah, I do. I can't, you know what my memory can be like, and I can't remember exactly what was going on, but I've never forgot the feeling I had. I just had this feeling of complete peace and just love and acceptance that I've never felt before. I've always struggled with my feelings of, not being good enough and not feeling enough, or not feeling that I live up to what the expectations are. And I just remember that night having a tear in my eye, because I didn't feel that in that moment with, the friends from Community of Christ. I just felt so loved, so welcomed, and so accepted for me as me. And I remember just crying, because it was a feeling I hadn't felt for so long.
And for many years, communion wasn't a particularly deep and meaningful experience to me. I mean, we only do it once a month, but in the last 8 to 10 years, I found a new depth to it through this thing called grace. This recognition that there is nothing I can do that will ever make me worthy of God's love. There isn't. I could convert 1,000 heathens, or whatever it is. There is nothing I can do that would ever make me worthy of God's love. But God loves me anyway, equally and without favor, and without, and it's a hard thing to accept, that it rains on the just and unjust in equal measure. I don't get any special privileges. I don't get time off for good behavior or for time served. I do this because I know that my heavenly parent loves me, and my vision of what that heavenly parent is will be different from yours. But so long as we can all accept that, we're all worthy because God loves us. I feel unworthy, and God says, don't be ridiculous. I love you. And if I love you, you must be worthy. And that is a lesson, Alana, for you and for me and for everybody who may or may not be listening to this call, to this podcast. God loves you, and therefore you can't earn worthiness. I'm sorry, Bishop. You cannot earn worthiness. Worthiness, you are worthy because God loves you. And because of that, we cannot, in all conscience, exclude anyone, even people we might not like, even people who may have harmed us or hurt us. So I'm going to share something now, which is incredibly personal, but I'm going to share it because it's important to this story. When Kim and I got together, the present Mrs. Barrington, as I keep reminding her, number 3, we'd both been married before, and we felt
Can I just say, number 3, not not at the same
Oh
time.
yes,
I just really
not in parallel. Not in parallel. Thank you for that. I was getting a bit emotional. Because we've both been married before, we really felt that we didn't want to denigrate marriage anymore. We wanted to make sure. So we decided we would live together until we were sure. And I made that public. Now, if I'd have not said anything, it wouldn't have mattered. Nobody would have known. They might have suspected, but in Community of Christ, nobody would have challenged. But I wanted the support of the people, that were around me at the time. And one person in particular was vicious in their response to that. So much so that Kim, is a very special person, has only been to church once since then with me. And that time she had a panic attack and had to leave. It affected her that deeply. And recently I was asked to go and provide administration, laying on of hands to that person. And all of this welled up within me. And it was probably the strongest faith experience, the spiritual experience that I have ever had. When and I had to do it electronically because of COVID, and we'd been given permission not that long before that our sacraments could be provided remotely. So of course I couldn't put my hands on their head, I couldn't anoint their head with oil, I couldn't do any of those things. But I'd really focused on how could I deal with this situation, and I just had to say, this person is a child of yours, God. They are as worthy as I am of this blessing because you love them. And therefore I have to put everything back. I have to, whether I can ever forget, I have to ensure that my forgiveness will only ever be a fraction of your forgiveness for me. But I have to be that forgiving person so that I can perform my ministry as I have been called to do. And it became the most spiritual experience that I've ever had, where again, I'd prepared, I'd written some words, and the Spirit took through me and led me in the prayer of blessing to somewhere where I wasn't expecting it to go. And I felt drained, but I felt healed. And so, that's such an important lesson for us all, that we are all worthy. There are no second-class citizens in heaven. And that's why I struggle with terrestrial, celestial, whatever it is, kingdoms. We are all beautiful in the sight of God. We will all be made perfect, whatever that is, however that looks, all those kinds of. Sorry, that turned into a sermon. I do apologize.
That's all right.
Beautiful, thank you. And I think I guess what I would like to just maybe put a fine point on is the fact that these messages of worthiness, of inclusion, of remembering the overlooked and the marginalized, that mission is speaking powerfully to lots of Latter-day Saints. And so I wonder if you would mind maybe sharing a little bit about what you're hearing from people in the Latter-day Saint community for finding a spiritual home with Community of Christ too.
Okay, so what I would say is, let's start with the basics. We are a safe and sacred place for people from the LDS tradition to continue in their faith journey. I think the reason why a number gravitate to Community of Christ is there are many churches out there that if you walked in and said, I'm a Mormon, they would spend all their time being critical of the Book of Mormon and everything else. In Community of Christ, the view, our principles are, I mean, can I tell you a secret? I have never read the Book of Mormon. I'm a 17 Community of Christ, and I've never read the Book of Mormon.
Wow,
There are bits of it that are meaningful to me, but a bit like the Bible, when it gets into begats and wars and all that kind of stuff, it doesn't really, do.
I hear you.
But
I'm with you.
But you can come into Community of Christ, and if you want, if you believe that the Book of Mormon is the literal Word of God, that's okay. If you believe Joseph Smith was a polygamist and a woman abuser, and some of the conversations that happen in a number of the groups, that's okay too. There is nobody who's going to argue with you on that. We just won't do that. We will give you a space where you can come and bring the bits of the LDS tradition, the restoration tradition, that are meaningful to you with you on your journey. And we do not expect you to stay. Okay? We're not in this to say convert you and to get your name on the rolls and to milk you for tithe. To get you to tithe and all this. That's not our bag.
You mean you don't want me to get baptized within like 3 weeks?
No. We accept your baptism. If you're comfortable with the baptism that you had in the LDS Church, and that is meaningful to you, and you want to carry on with that, you can do. I see Charlotte's on the call. Charlotte felt that because of, the transition that she was going through, she wanted to be rebaptized, as she is now. And so we were happy to do that. I was humbled to be and honored to be asked to do that. So people can come to us and bring the baggage, the things that they hold dear, the things that they want to maintain and keep, and bring those with them. For those who want to just say, actually looking at Urim and Thummim or whatever it was and all those kinds of things, I'm not so sure about that, but it's become, you've absorbed it. It does actually become part of your DNA. And so, we're seeing a number of people who come because of that. We see a lot of people who would like to come, but because of their family, because they don't want to lose those connections, they don't want to lose the love and the embrace of their congregation. They have members of their family who, they feel it would really upset. That for me is understandable. So we are so much smaller, that we're not everywhere. And so it's sometimes hard for people because, they don't have that physical connection, that weekly rhythm. So we have been doing the online worships, as you know, and there are a number of expressions of those on a Sunday. There's about 20 or 30 around the world, and there's two out of the one in Europe, across Europe, including the British Isles, ours, which also has friends from the States and all over the place joining us. We don't say you can only worship in this ward. You go where you are comfortable and happy and feel loved. So we see people who would love to come but can't because of those familial things. We have people who find it very hard to come into a community where there isn't somebody saying what is right and what is wrong. We call on the membership through our principles to make responsible choices. Does that mean I can or can't drink tea or coffee? That's up to you. Does it mean I can or can't drink alcohol? It's up to you. Are you making a responsible choice in doing that thing? When it comes to how we approach climate change or how we approach recycling, is it a responsible thing to stick everything in one bin and not to make an effort to separate out our recycling? So and it's trying to apply those principles. And the challenge with any principle is it's not about meeting the mark. when you have a rule, and we see this in business a great deal, when you have a rule, people work to, you know, it's like filing your accounts. You file your accounts on a particular day. It's about meeting that rule, that regulation. Having a principle draws you on and makes you want to go further with that principle, because it isn't just about a benchmarking exercise. So when you look at our principles, for people who come from a space, and the same is true within, you know, places like the Jehovah's Witness community as well, who've also had very real challenges with LGBT ministry and so on. Well, just shunning and exclusion. The fact that we have these principles and not thou shalt not, some people find that hard. And I can understand that. It's kind of comfortable to know what I can and can't do, what I can and can't say, how I can and can't dress. It's actually harder to say, Richard, it's up to you to live the life that God wants you to lead. And yeah, if you want to come and talk to me, and Andrew Bolton has always been one of my mentors, you know, and we've had some conversations, you know, and there've been a few in the church who've always been incredibly supportive of this sinner, because we are a community. You know, we don't have a hierarchy. The priesthood it's a servant priesthood. You know, we are here to serve God and his people, or her people, not because it makes me more important than the next, or it gets me into a higher rung in glory. That's not why we do these things. It's because we are loved. And that, I think, and I hope, is the message to those of you who are watching this, who are in the LDS tradition. You are welcome to come and rest a while. You are welcome to come and stay. You are welcome to just go, it's not for me. We're not, you know, there are a couple of people I've seen pop up on some of the messaging. And I think one of the things that impresses or concerns or worries them is we don't proselytize. A number of you have said to me, it was so damn hard to find you.
Yes, that's what I thought. Yeah, absolutely.
You know, and that's because it's about us living our, you know, our job is to live the gospel, and to share that gospel when asked. But, you know, I find living the gospel is more rewarding for me than standing on a street corner using the Bible to abuse people, or to try and convince people.
There are lots of things that I was thinking that, you know, we would maybe cover tonight that I'd like to save for a chat another day, because I feel like the focus on worth and all of the things that you've spoken about have been so impactful. I feel like we should talk again, but I wanted to express my thankfulness for is, like you say, like I've had a safe place. I'll come and hang out on a Sunday online, and that's part of my my Sunday spiritual practice. Especially, I think, you know, the way it's able to sort of fit in and complement the other things I'm doing. You know, it's just been wonderful. I have really appreciated being able to see women minister in the priesthood. I've had really powerful experiences as I've seen that happen. I really appreciated the study and the sort of academic focus at times from some of the members of Community of Christ who are you know, able to talk about history, are able to sort of talk about, you know, things that maybe are making them slightly uncomfortable, you know, that you know, maybe they haven't loved particular aspects of church history. Those things to me have been quite eye-opening, to be able to see oh, so it is possible to have discussions and not be threatened by differences of opinion. Mostly, I found the focus, I think, on community be such a powerful thing for me. It's been something that I've really needed over the past couple of years as caring for a son with special needs has meant that I really struggle to interact in communities in the way that I would really like. Not being able to get to church on a Sunday when you want to go and just get a break and hear about Jesus. To be able to meet people with no agenda other than let's talk some Jesus stuff, to make actual friends who really have been part of my journey, has been wonderful. So I want to thank you and all of the people that of Community of Christ who have made that possible.
Jane, blessed to be a blessing. It is such an important thing. We are diminished every time we turn someone away from our community, from our groups, from whatever else. And whether we do that explicitly, the one thing that I take from the creed, we don't have a creed, but the one thing I take from the creed is the sin of omission and commission. The things that we do and the things that we don't do. There have been times when we haven't been as welcoming a community as we should have been. And we have to repent from that. There have been times when we have tried to control what other people do in the bedroom. We have to repent from that. It's not our place. If something happens between two people in love, who am I to judge? So long as it is consensual, it is legal, just live your life, folks. And we have to reflect that in everything that we do and who we are and how we are, to be who we're called to be, which is the peacemakers. Blessed are the peacemakers. It's not blessed are the argumentative, although with my family background, you'd think it was. That's not, we're called to be peacemakers. We're called to be in the world. Yeah, in the world and not of it, all that stuff. But what does that really mean? It means being the hands, the feet, the arms, the voice of Jesus, challenging structures and things that put other people down or that are damaging our God's creation. This is our home. We're going to look after it. An assumption. Why all Christians aren't at the forefront of the green movement, I don't know. Because as far as I'm concerned, I don't get how you can be a Christian and not be dedicated to preserving the creation that our Heavenly Parent gave us as a gift. Yeah, this is God's gift. How can we trash it? How can we abuse God's gift to us? So that's and you have been and I don't know if there are a few people watching this who weren't on Sunday night's worship. I'd asked Jane to sing a hymn that she didn't know, and she worked really, really hard to learn. I thought it's a Scottish melody. She must know it. She's from Scotland, and she worked really hard and sang beautifully a hymn that was about giftedness and sacredness. And so, you've been a blessing to us. And Alana, I know you haven't made many yet, and I know you've got some challenges.
I just forget, to be honest.
Genuinely, it's nothing personal. Genuinely,
I would do, but frequently, if I forget, there's a blank screen, and that's not a good one. But that's okay, It's about where your heart is, and that's what we
Absolutely.
have to. We have to really embrace. I'm sorry about my laptop wobbling about. I was saying to Jane earlier, I haven't got broadband at the moment, so I'm tethered to my mobile phone, and my laptop's on my legs, and they've gone to sleep a couple of times because I'm getting old. So I've been wobbling. Apologies.
Well, what I'm going to I'm going to ask if you've got any sort of final thoughts to share before I get Alana to take us out. But I wanted to just the experience of being able to worship in Community of Christ, which is so it has been a real blessing to me and a real strength to be able to do that. Glynis is very graciously saying that I sang all right, but what's really great is that when I don't know a hymn and I can laugh, I can change the tune, I can laugh, and everybody's just so supportive, and they're like, oh, it really, you don't sort of feel, you really genuinely don't feel judged. I have loved the experience of and I speak about it a lot, the experience of what prayer can look like, because I feel like no two worships look the same, which is really exciting. What's it going to be like this week? But when there's those moments of prayer where people's joys and concerns are being shared, and that's shaped into a prayer representing the whole community, that's a beautiful thing, and you can really see people being bound together through prayer and through their concern for each other, their love for it's very, very, it's beautiful. So I'll if there's anything that you would like to share and then Alana will take us out tonight.
No, I think if anybody is interested, we do run a daily prayer for peace, which is a mini worship every day, and it is just very much about exactly what you're saying, coming together as a community and really trying to get that peaceful spirit within us. I guess the one thing I would share is the mission prayer, and the mission prayer is, God, where will your spirit lead today? Help me to be fully awake and ready to respond. Grant me the courage to risk something new, to be a blessing of your love and peace. And I think if everybody on the planet, even if it's just us, said that every morning as we wake, I think our lives and everybody that we come into contact with will be blessed as a result of that statement, because it just helps us think about, I need to be a blessing. I have been so blessed myself. I've had a family that have loved me beyond measure. I've got a church faith community that love me in spite of me. And I have a heavenly parent who gave everything for me. I have to give it back. I have to find opportunities to be who I am called to be, which is a peacemaker in this world of ours. And if any of you experience that and feel the same, then welcome on the journey. And it doesn't matter whether you wear chastity garments or not, or have you showing your shoulders or not. It doesn't matter. If we're all on the same journey, we should all be on the same page, which is moving towards the peaceful one, the Son of God.
Thank you, Richard.
Thank you for having me.
I love you.
Can I just say, this is the first time ever that I've done one of these. Although I'm supposed to be doing my testimony in a couple of weeks for Community Connections, so I'm going to have to think of some new material. But it has been as I've tried over the last week or two to really think about what what message I wanted to bring. It's been insightful for me. It's been an honor to be a part of this, and I thank you for the opportunity.
Oh no, we thank you, Richard.
Alana, are you ready to take us out?
Sure am. So again, Richard, just want to thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule. We really, really appreciate it, and we just want to bless your journey. And we just want to say thank you very much to our audience for listening, and for all your comments. Just so you don't forget to like and subscribe to our Facebook page, our YouTube channel, or whether it's where you find your podcasts.
Oh,
So we just
Alana,
want, yeah.
Alana, do you have any announcements you would
Oh,
like?
I think I
tonight?
have a huge announcement tonight.
It's big. It's a big breath, everybody.
Well, it's huge for us. So on Friday, the 28th of May, we have another podcast. And we have the wonderful Mormon Stories legend, John DeLynn, coming on our podcast at 8 p.m. British Standard Time. And we are so looking forward to it. So this Friday at 8, we hope to see you there with John DeLynn. And again,
Thanks,
Richard, thank you so very much.
It's a pleasure. Can I?
Okay, we'll catch you all soon. We'll put some
get me
links
tea
in the
now.
show notes.
Oh, of course you can.
I've got a mug of tea waiting.
We'll put some links in the show notes so that if you do want to join a worship from Community of Christ, then Richard can share all the details with that if you want to get in touch. And we will see you all in the next podcast. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
God bless. Good night.